Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellowshow. I'm your host, the Fellow KGB. You can follow me on Twitter at the Fellow KGB. And tonight it is New Year's Eve night, December 31st, about 7 o'clock p.m. Central Time here. I'm joined by our good friend John Heffernon. You can follow him on Twitter at JK Heffernon. His link is in the description below. John, we're going to be talking just kind of loosely about whatever comes to mind here. We'll look at some players. We'll talk about some teams. We'll talk about some things that impressed us, and I'll probably open that up. That's probably the first thing we'll talk about. So I'll bounce that over to you. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, I appreciate it, Kyle, and happy New Year. Just slightly early to everyone. Looking forward to chatting.
So the way Drake and I opened up with our Tuesday podcast show was I just kind of threw out the question. We've had 4 or 5 games from each team now. We can kind of see some things that have impressed us or maybe disappointed us. I'm actually just pulling up like the official NBA standings page right now. There's some teams that have really good records that are kind of, a little bit surprising. Orlando Magic sitting at 4-0. The Pacers, the Hawks, there's some teams there with only 1 loss. And then just some bottom feeder teams. I think like the Washington Wizards at 0-5, that kind of surprises people. The Raptors 0-3, and then our Bucks at 2-3. I just want to toss it to you and see what have you observed through like really the first 7-8 days of basketball. What's going on?
Yeah, it's been interesting. What the first thing I observe is the only undefeated team left are the Magic. They're playing right now. And I think they're going to get smoked by Philly. I kind of stopped watching because they were down by 30 in like the first half. The Magic seem to do this every single year where they like come out of the gates like the first week or two with like a really crazy record, and everyone's like, "Oh my goodness, is it their year?" And then they just end up the season 500. The biggest surprise, and just in terms of straight standings for me, is the Raptors.
Mm-hmm.
While I didn't think they would, be maybe in the upper tier, that Bucks, Clippers, Lakers tier of elite teams in the NBA. I kind of thought they would definitely be one of those strong second tier teams that you definitely don't want to face in the playoffs. Can win any given night against any given opponent, and they're definitely struggling. It's interesting to see. I don't think it's going to sustain. I think they'll bounce back, but Lowry is 35 or 34, and he's not getting any younger, and Siakam he's kind of like a Chris Middleton type, a great number 2, but is he really a number 1 option? I wonder what his upside as a number 1 and what the upside of the team he leads as a number 1 player, just in terms of the pure basketball performance. He's still giving you semi-useful fantasy numbers, but based on his draft position, he's even underperforming there. So those are the 2 surprises to me. I'm surprised. Another thing I'm sort of surprised about is the Lakers actually being really good. I thought they would really be kind of chill out. I mean, 3-2 maybe isn't that good, but I thought they would lose a bunch of games early on and rest LeBron a bunch, and so far they've been like playing pretty much everyone. And I'm just impressed that they're not like taking it easy to start the season. So I find it interesting.
Yeah, and I think my biggest takeaway through the first week of games is that this still feels like preseason. Teams are still playing 10, 11, 12 guys on a bench. That's typically not something we see. Normally you have a full preseason. These teams are working out their lineups, they're getting things figured out, getting the kinks and the minutes and everything kind of adjusted here. But again, like teams only played 3 or 4 preseason games this year, so everything's kind of like a touch and go thing right now. I know with the Bucks, I don't know if you want to talk about what we've been seeing out of the Milwaukee Bucks, but it's been a huge roller coaster so far through just 5 games. We had that the sweet high from what was it, Tuesday night of hitting an NBA record 29 3-pointers in a game. And then last night there's that interesting argument. I don't know if you saw that between Giannis and Chris Middleton, and then of course the next play they come back live. It's an alley-oop between the two. But the Bucks, man, just a lot of weird. Teams are still figuring out who they are, especially with the roster and the lineups and just getting minutes in certain groupings figured out here. I think there's a lot of things to learn yet. But what have we seen from the Bucks?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing a lot of playing time in non-garbage time minutes for guys I would consider human victory cigars, and like your Thanasises and your Sam Merrills and your Jordan Nowaras, and maybe those rookies Nowara and Merrill really can have staying power in the lineup. But I just when games really matter, I don't expect to see those guys playing minutes unless it's the end of a blowout. Whether the Bucks are ahead or the Bucks behind, but. Yeah, I think your observation I think is 100% on point. We're seeing a little bit of preseason caliber basketball, specifically with rotations. I mean, these games count, and I think the players are going all out. But there's also this massive gap in like off season length. Some teams have had like a 70 to 100 game off season if you made it any reasonably far in the playoffs, and other teams have had, nearly 200 plus days off. So there's just a lot of weird variables kind of in the mix right now. But the Bucks specifically, I think they're just we're trying to see what they have in just about everyone. Even still, DJ Wilson still can't get minutes, which I find really surprising. Even in a scenario where they're trying to give everyone as many minutes as possible, Connaughton is just playing way too much. I think he's a good spark plug guy, but he's not a guy who needs to play every single game.
Sure.
And I like him. I think he's an awesome dude just as a human being, but just in terms of basketball quality that he brings to the table, he's not super helpful all the time. The guys I've been relatively impressed by, and maybe not necessarily from a stats perspective, but Bobby Portis and Bryn Forbes are absolutely doing their job. Bryn Forbes is especially from the corners. He's shooting a lot of threes, and Giannis is constantly on the lookout for him specifically. I mean, Giannis is a willing passer to just about anyone, but I feel like he's really been looking for Forbes when those two share the court together, and they're not on the court all the time together because Forbes comes off the bench.
Right.
But Portis, I think, has, at least in my mind, has really underperformed fantasy-wise. But I feel like he's been a really useful piece. He's getting a lot of minutes. He's playing some power forward. He's playing some center, like I kind of hypothesized in the preseason. And I think he's playing better basketball than he is as a fantasy performer. I guess he's still giving you 24, 25 for your last dude on the bench. That most people aren't going to complain too much about that, but I like what I'm seeing out of him. The biggest surprise for me has been DiVincenzo. I feel like I haven't seen him miss a three yet this season. I know that's obviously not true, but he's just been scorching hot from three. Very, very impressed by him. And not so surprisingly, Drew Holiday has fit the team like a glove. And I think the Bucks really feel like they have a very strong big three. And it's the most balanced big three in the NBA. And what I mean by that is not only are these three guys elite offensively, but they're elite defensively too. They're the most flexible and balanced big three in the NBA. I don't necessarily know if they have enough juice between the three of them to make a finals run, but I think if they can work out the kinks and the role players can do their jobs, I think this team's going to be very competitive come postseason time.
Yeah, I'd like. I mean, the Bobby Portis thoughts are very accurate, but the thing that I've kind of mentioned on the side to a few friends is just watching the Bucks with Drew Holiday compared to Eric Bledsoe. The stress levels are much lower when Drew Holiday is on the court. He's like the perfect glue guy for this team. But I mean, I had to talk to some friends last night that are like, "What's going on with the Bucks?" And we're 5 games into a season here where you're inserting a new ball distributor, Drew Holiday. They got Bobby Portis, who's essentially the 6th, 7th guy there. They're working in Bryn Forbes. They're working in a lot of different pieces here, trying to figure things out. But I will say the biggest disappointment for me has been Brook Lopez on a minutes basis. It's just last night was one of the best rebounding games of his season so far. He ended up with 8 rebounds, but as far as a really productive fantasy player, the last 2 seasons with the Bucks, it's been a really slow start to the 2020-21 season. So I'm a little bit disappointed in him, but I guess that opens it up for Bobby Portis here, who is only 14% rostered, and he's seen a positive 10% plus ad rate lately, and he's a guy that, as your worst player on your team, the Bucks, it looks like on a low end he's going to get the 16 to 18 minutes. But as we've seen with Milwaukee so far this year, they're in these weird roller coaster type games where they're either going to blow a team out, they might get blown out themselves, and then we really haven't had too many really competitive games from the Bucks so far. So that leaves Bobby's minutes in this kind of huge range of outcomes. But he's been super productive, and I like what I see with him on the floor. The team actually the team's a little bit, I think it's a little bit more fun to watch when Bobby Portis is on the floor. The team runs the ball up and down the court a little bit more. They look to push a little bit, whereas with Lopez, they kind of have to slow down and get into their offense. And sometimes that's a bad thing for the Bucks. I think we all know that the Bucks are one of the best transition teams. And I just think Bobby Portis really helps them just get the ball down the court quicker. And he's just been super productive. So I like what Bobby Portis there is doing. I guess now that we're kind of talking about, maybe we'll just kind of pull up some numbers here, and we'll just look and see who's some players that should be available. I just want to shout out Justin.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to say Happy New Year to Justin. Thanks for hanging out in the chat room tonight, man. Hope everything's going well for you this evening. But what was your thought there, John?
I was just going to follow up on one thing you said. You got me thinking about the difference between Bledsoe and Drew Holiday,
Yep.
and they're it's a fascinating compare contrast. They have very similar, just statistically speaking, they have very similar impact on the court. They're not elite 3-point shooters. They play elite defense. They get 4 to 7 assists a game. They don't shoot. They shoot the 3rd to the 5th most shots on their team in pretty much every game. And they score relatively efficiently, especially in the paint for guards. Like they're so similar statistically, but the big difference that I'm seeing, and especially now I'm watching Drew Holiday regularly, where I really never have in the past. Bledsoe gets his stats because he's a jitterbug. He's a spark plug. He's a Russell Westbrook clone. He's a poor man's Westbrook, I guess you could say. He's just flying up and down the court. And Holiday, he produces the same effect, but he does it in a slow, steady, calm, smooth way. It's amazing. Their impact is similar. I think Holiday is a better defender, though Bledsoe is great in his own right. But just the silkiness and the smoothness and the pace, the way Holiday controls his pace, whereas Bledsoe is just pushing the tempo pedal to the metal the whole time. It's a fascinating dichotomy. So I find you just got me thinking about that, and I thought the people might want to know what's in my mind.
Well, with Bledsoe, it's almost kind of like an organized chaos kind of thing. He just plays so loose, and so like he's very physical, very violent. When he's with the ball in his hand, he's just kind of like someone just kicked a hornet's nest, and they just let him loose kind of thing, which is really fun to watch. But there's certain times where he would lose some points for us or cost us a couple weird plays, or he's more susceptible to some of those question mark plays. Whereas Drew Holiday is just super steady, and I just think that offense, especially with the way Chris Middleton's shooting the ball, he's looking like, I know he was an all-star last year, but he looks much better than he did in previous years. So I really like what Holiday, he's just bringing like a cool, calm, level-headedness to the team, and providing a really consistent clip at the scoring department. So I think Holiday's a lot of fun. I think if you took him in somewhere in the 3rd round of fantasy drafts this year, you're probably feeling really good about that. And he's had some games where he's kind of the leading scorer for spurts. So I think the Bucks got a really good one there. The cost can be debated, but I think overall as a team, watching them play, it's more gracious basketball. They're still figuring themselves out, but there's a lot less chaos and stuff going on. So, but I did want to kind of at the moment right now, I have our player pool pulled up in in our leagues here. And I typed in, I filtered it by every player available, and then I just hit the percent change in percent rostered. So I kind of wanted to just work our way down this, and maybe this can kind of lead our discussion to look into certain teams. Like the first 2 guys on this list that have had the most change this year has been 2 Cleveland Cavaliers, and that's Darius Garland and Larry Nance Jr. I've been a fan of Darius Garland. I actually won a Darius Garland prop bet this afternoon here too, so that was kind of fun. just a side note, one of my favorite prop bets just through the first week of basketball has been taking the combined points, rebounds, and assists. And you kind of just look at that as a whole. So tonight, Darius Garland needed to hit 23.5, and he ended up with a total of 21 points, 2 rebounds, 5 assists. This was a floor game for him. I know he had more points. He didn't really chip in as much in the other categories as he usually did, but this is the guy that's been filling it up. I think people, kind of saw this right away. So the train's kind of out of the station at this point. He's 81.3% owned, but a plus 61% spike. That's a pretty good jump in availability there, and he's the number 3 ranking too. But before I toss it back to you, then you got with Kevin Love out. Me and Drake talked about the Cavaliers a little bit, and Kevin Love is going to be out for I think at least 3-4 weeks. Larry Nance Jr. was ideally the next man up, but he comes in here and he's putting up back-to-back 30-point games for fantasy, and he's a really savvy big man who can actually just fill out everything on the stat column here. You see the 7 assists from earlier tonight, only 10 points, 5 boards, but the 7 assists, the 2 steals, the 1 block, just a really, really solid player here. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, man, all of a sudden they're playing good ball. They did lose tonight, but did you have any thoughts quickly on the Cleveland Cavs?
Larry Nance is the most underrated player in the NBA right now.
Wow.
He looks absolutely incredible. Really, really efficient. Really, really, using his minutes productively. Not only scoring a little bit, but he's just contributing everywhere. And you just pointed out, even assists. I mean, he's a guy who it's like, you're not super surprised if he scores 20 once in a while, or grabs 10 rebounds, or gets a couple steals, or gets a couple blocks. But to do it all in pretty much every single game, while once in a while adding 3, 4, 5 plus assists, very, very impressive. I think even when Kevin Love comes back, he's a guy that they're going to be playing a lot of minutes, and he's earned a big role.
Well, 36 minutes just tonight. I'm trying to look real quick and see what he was at the other night, but this was a guy that I think last year he was one of those players that probably every week someone new had him. Like we would burn him for like 2 games, let go of him. He was a guy that everyone kind of had a little part of him at some point in the season. But I think at this point, man, like we're seeing 36 minutes, 43 minutes, 35 just in the last 3 games here. So we're really starting to see some really good stuff out of Larry Nance, and he's about 65.7% owned. He's seen about a 40% spike in people adding him. So this might be the last, opportunity to just check your league and see if he's out there. You got basically a 66% chance of seeing if he's there. So definitely check him out. But Drake and I talked kind of in depth about the Cleveland Cavs. They're sitting at 3-2 at the moment. They kind of struggled a little bit tonight. They had some third quarter woes here, but they gave the Pacers a decent run in the fourth quarter to make it look respectable. But again, no Kevin Love tonight. Colin Sexton, though, Andre Drummond, they're playing really well. And then those are probably the top, you got Garland, Sexton, Drummond, and Larry Nance. I think that's really the best 4 players and really the only 4 players you want to use for fantasy. Was there anything else here in Cleveland for you?
And I think you and Drake have probably covered it, and we'll talk about it again on Tuesday with our big Cavs guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think we're good on the Cavs. I could pontificate on Garland and Sexton all day, and Drummond and Nance. I mean, they have not only are they a good basketball team this year, but they have a lot of really strong fantasy producers.
Mm-hmm.
I think no need to oversaturate the people with Cavs.
So this was a team that the next team we're going to talk about here. This was a team that I really was excited to hear from you, and that's going to be the Memphis Grizzlies. And we're talking John Morant being out for a little while here. We're going to probably look and see who is the potential fantasy ads. Let's just kind of take a look at Memphis as a team right now, and just kind of see. I mean, how does a team replace one of the most exciting young players, one of their best player on their team? Where does Memphis go from here? I guess I'll throw it to you that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cliche. It's a sports cliche, but when you lose, your irreplaceable superstar, you have to make up for his absence by committee. I think that's such a common thing you hear from people, but I think it is true in this instance. I mean, and to be fair, the Grizzlies, by committee can't make up for Ja's absence. I mean, they look like an average to slightly above average team with Ja, with some playoff upside, like 8, 7, 8, 9, or 6, 7, 8 seed potential. uh, and that's with Ja. Ja, who I mean, after one game, I was like, oh, we got a MVP watch. I mean, I was even in our group chat. I was like, hey, he's my keeper next year. I mean, I'm just he's so special. But yeah, I think the Grizzlies are really going to struggle. They're going to be very close to the bottom of the standings until they get Ja back. And then it will be interesting to see what the team decides to do. I mean, I think Ja is too much of a competitor, and the team has kind of already decided he's their guy going forward. So if he says, I want to compete, they're going to go for it and try to win as many games as possible. But in the West, not being a really bad team for a quarter of the season or a fifth of the season is
That might be too much to overcome.
it's a kiss of death, I think, especially because it's the Grizzlies, and there's no way they're going to scrape together a couple wins. But guys that I think could benefit, if anyone, Kyle Anderson's a really good facilitator. He's a good passer. I think he might potentially, have some benefit. Obviously, he's being added a lot. I mean, he's not going to like save your season or anything if you're struggling fantasy wise, but he's a guy who could benefit. I look at that game from yesterday. The nine assists. I think he's going to come in and kind of be, but probably their lead assist getter while Ja is out. That isn't always, even in that game, 9 assists, but only 18.5 total fantasy points. It's not always going to translate to good fantasy production. But he'll be, he's one of those guys. Like one game he'll get you 30, the next game he'll get you 10. So just temper your expectations. So Anderson takes up the facilitator role, and I think Dylan Brooks probably feasts the most in terms of the scoring role. But I mean, even still, you see these most recent games, the games that they didn't have Ja. Brooks did well in one, and not he did fine in the other. But it just kind of speaks to the Grizzlies' caliber of talent behind Ja. It's going to take a whole team effort, and I'm not sure any single one of these guys is going to be consistent.
Yeah, I think this 24 to 41, that's probably the range for Dylan Brooks on a nightly basis. Sure, it could be low end 20s, high end 40s. But for the most part, if they need a shot, they're going to Dylan Brooks. If they need something down low, you still got Jonas down there. But Kyle Anderson, this is a guy that he probably should be owned. I think at this point, you kind of hit on it, but the offense is probably going to run a lot of their stuff through him. And then you also see too. I mean, the 9 assists that sticks out from last night, but you also see 7 rebounds, 14 rebounds, 10 rebounds. I think this might have been a career high for him, 28 points. So he is kind of touching on some really good numbers here. Just got to get those turnovers down, the 8 and the 4. I think that's if you get that down to 4, you're going to add a good amount of points here, and you're looking at a much higher floor. But so for me, it's their first. It really was their first full complete game without John Morant. So of course there's probably going to be, a little week of trial and error here as they're trying to figure things out. The guy that, essentially started in place of John Morant was Tyus Jones. This was a guy that I picked up. A little bit disappointed. He came in on relief in the Brooklyn game. He ended up with 35 minutes, 9 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, 2 steals. So that was all really nice to see. About 26 fantasy points here. But just kind of low in some of the numbers here. But I do like this guy's ability on defense. He's kind of sticky with the steals and the blocks. He's very physical and competitive. So I do think that this is probably a floor game for Tyus Jones. Only 23 minutes. I don't know. I'd have to look deeper into the box score to figure out what was going on in that game. But it just seemed like the Grizzlies are going to be going through some growing pains here for at least the next 2-3 games as they're trying to figure out what's going on here. But in terms
Absolutely. A lot emphasis on the pains, Kyle.
Yeah. And then just in terms of percent rostership, I mean, you're looking at Kyle Anderson, who's under 34% owned in ESPN leagues right now. He has seen a massive spike in 32.7. So just in the last week, people have kind of noticed here. But again, they're small forward position. This is a guy that has been putting up some really impressive numbers. He just hasn't really put it all together in one game. Like this guy, he could be flirting with a triple-double at some point, pretty soon here, the way he's been playing. So I do like Anderson a lot. I think he needs to be on people's radars. And as your worst player on your bench, you're essentially getting probably one of the, the 1A, the 1B player on a not great Memphis Grizzlies. But again, you got to follow those fantasy points. Dylan Brooks is also another guy, a little bit more owned, about 60%. But definitely, if he's available in your league, he's definitely worth checking out. And then the guy that just to monitor again, Tyus Jones, about 19 points last night. Nothing really great, but it was low minutes. So I like the almost point per minute in terms of fantasy. He's about 5% owned, so this is definitely a guy to add to your watch list if you needed someone to kind of just monitor. But outside of those top three, I guess the top four with Jonas here, nothing really. I don't think we can trust too far from Memphis, but we're
One,
gonna.
one last thing about Kyle Anderson. If you get points for nicknames, his nickname is Slow Mo, one of my personal favorite nicknames in the NBA. So just for nickname alone, give Kyle Anderson on your watch list.
Is there a specific reason why it's slow mo, or is it like the obvious reason? Is he kind of just like a smooth, slow player?
He's super super slow.
Hmm. Not rushing to get out there. So I did want to kind of bounce back to the filter of all people here, and we're kind of just going to work our way down the list. I don't know if you care to talk about the Charlotte Hornets. There is some good young talent there that I think is kind of fun. Terry Rozier, that first game that he had of the season here, I think my dad had him on the bench. That 42-point game, the 50-point fantasy game. So that was kind of interesting. But you're really seeing Terry, settle in as a primary scoring threat for the Charlotte Hornets. 18 points has been his lowest through 4 games, and he's not gonna go crazy in the rebounds or the assists, but I think people caught on to him after that first game. Of course, people are gonna catch on to him. He's about 87% owned now, so the train's likely left the station. But I do want to kind of talk about the Charlotte Hornets because they actually had a pretty productive game last night. And then we can also kind of touch on what are we seeing from LaMelo Ball. I think people are a little bit disappointed with his minutes and his output so far this year. I think Devontae Graham is getting a little bit more run than people anticipated. But I guess anything on the Hornets here that I guess you've seen from box scores or just anything in general?
Yeah, if you could filter by like points or fantasy points, that would be so sweet.
Yep. So yeah,
Um,
there you go.
so yeah, no, I appreciate that. So Rozier, his average of in terms of like our league scoring, his average fantasy points per game are 36.4, but he had that 50. What was it, like 53? Yeah, he had 53 game one, so he's got a pretty solid outlier there, propping up his average. Now, even removing the 53, I mean, you're not going to be upset
Sure.
with, especially where he was probably drafted, middle or late rounds of drafts. He's giving you high 20s, low 30s for the other games, and his minutes are really strong. I really like Rozier, and he's a piece that I think if he has like 2 or 3 or 4 more games in like the low high 20s, low 30s, his owner might be willing to dish him, if you need point guard help or shooting guard help. So he's a guy that I like a lot this year. I think he's pretty. His minutes are pretty locked in. I mean,
Yep.
I like LaMelo. I think he's a good player, but he cannot shoot the basketball with any level of competence for an NBA player or maybe even for a collegiate level player. He's an absolutely especially for the guard position. Like a center, that's a little more forgivable, but for the guard position, it's really quite disgusting, honestly. I think so. With that in mind, I think Rozier is locked in as the number one guard on this team for the duration of the season. Devontae Graham obviously proved his stripes last year. And really, until LaMelo can start making shots in any consistent clip, or I guess another possibility which could kind of crap on Devontae and Rozier's stats a little bit is if they fall way out of playoff contention
Want to
and
get
they decide let's give LaMelo the keys to the car and whatever happens, just let him grow. So that might be something to look out for. But right now the Hornets are 2-2. They're 500. They're competing. They don't look great, but Eastern Conference is definitely the lesser quality conference in the NBA. So they're absolutely in the mix for a playoff spot right now. 1 week into the season, so don't hold me to that or anything. But yeah, I like Rozier. Graham is solid. Hayward is a guy that I think he's kind of in some aspects he's a better actual basketball player than a fantasy producer. but it just depends on the game you watch. You know, his fantasy stats look really solid. His stat lines look really solid. His consistent steal numbers are very interesting this year. And as long as he stays healthy, he should in theory be their highest fantasy
Yeah.
points per game guy. You've talked a lot about PJ Washington in the past. I think he's doing okay this year. Maybe, you know, he's a little more. I don't know if you expected him to fluctuate like he is, but I kind of thought he would be a little more consistent instead of kind of have a couple booms and a couple busts. But you know, he's also very, very young. This is year two for him. Upside is obviously there. You look at those the back to backs on December 26th and December 27th. Those are pretty freaking impressive games for 20, 21-year-old kids. So he's definitely a guy I would keep my eyes on. And if he has another, like, you know, another couple, you know, semi stinker games in the next couple weeks, I would maybe target him as someone to trade for, or maybe even just watch, you know, see what his owner is doing. And he might get dropped, you know, depending on how things go. I don't know, depending on how smart, you know, how deep your league is and stuff. But he's a guy I would definitely keep my eye on. And if he underperforms a little bit more to start the season, maybe a trade target. So Hornets are a team that I think are sneaky good for fantasy. Not sneaky good at actual basketball, but they're gonna be more competitive this year than I think people expected. And LaMelo is way worse than people expected, so it's confusing.
So LaMelo just had, you know, a career high the other night here, 22 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, you know, a 43.5 fantasy game here. I think that was because the game maybe got a little bit out of hand there. Um, but man, like you're seeing a little bit of glimpse here. I still don't think LaMelo is going to be a guy you're going to want to trust. This 82% rostership here seems a little bit too high. I did want to point out with the PJ Washington, he's less than 50% owned. So this is if you just look at the 27.3 fantasy points average, like that makes sense. So I do expect, you know, some of these like the 15 and the 12, but you see these 29 or the 39 and the 42s. I think there's going to be some leveling off for PJ Washington. I like his minutes. If you do look here, the 18 minutes against Dallas last night and the 21 against Cavaliers, those are low end games where things just kind of got out of hand. For the most part, he's going to be, you know, above 30 minutes, and that's where you're going to see these big games. So I do at 50%, less than 50% owned, PJ Washington's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. If the owner gets frustrated and he gets dropped, I'm definitely looking to add him there too. But I guess the one thing that I wanted to point out was starting center Cody Zeller is going to be out for a little while. I think he's got a hand injury, a broken hand. So this wasn't a player that we were super excited. Like nobody was thinking about Cody Zeller for fantasy. But now that his minutes are up for grabs, I've noticed this to be I added him. This is Bismack Biyombo is my worst player on my team right now. But in the 3 games without Cody Zeller, you're seeing 30 minutes a game. Like this is, you know, basically guaranteed at the moment. I'm going to get about 30 minutes per game. I'm going to see a handful of rebounds. I'm going to see some good assist numbers for a big guy here too. No one really considers him a super athletic player, but I like what I'm seeing there. He's going to contribute in the blocks. So as the worst guy on my team here at 23.5, that'll do. You know, maybe some upsides to get a double-double on a random night or two for me throughout the week. But this is a guy only 5.8% owned. And if you do need center minutes, this is a guy that if you're in categories leagues, he's going to help you with the blocks. He's going to help you with the rebounds, not so much in the points, but this is a big guy that can kind of help out in several, you know, traditional big categories there. So I do like Bismack Biyombo, again, less than 6% owned. So there is some as less, you know, as a less exciting team as the Charlotte Hornets are, there is some fantasy value here to be had. And I actually, because on the Yahoo Sports app, the last, you know, basically the first week of the season, they were allowing you to watch free games. So I was kind of popping in and out of games, maybe like 10 minutes at a time. But I enjoyed watching the Hornets. They're a young team. There's a lot of excitement going on there, even with LaMelo Ball kind of struggling at the beginning. But there's a lot of fun young talent. It's a frisky team. I think that's the way I would describe them. They're going to be pesky, and yes, they. I don't know, a lot of fun. When the way Terry Rozier's playing, Terry Rozier's to me just one of those guys that you want to root for. I was excited to see him get away from Boston and actually get a chance to be a starter. And you're starting to see him, you know, really play well. So I do like what the Hornets have going on, you know, developing in the future. Maybe it's not there right now, but there's some pieces that caught my eye. I did want to. Maybe I'll throw this to you. Was there any team in particular you wanted me to kind of highlight and we look at? I think the next team that I wanted to pull up was the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think that's another team that Drake and I talked about this a lot the other night, where we were looking at these teams like Detroit, Oklahoma City. I can't remember another one, but Memphis was another one too. Like these bottom tier teams in the NBA, but because of opportunity, all of a sudden we have to be looking at these teams and these players for fantasy value. Was there a certain team that comes to mind the way I paint that?
Um, not that comes to mind. Now, I was kind of half paying attention to you for a little bit of that because I was doing my best to figure out exactly how LaMelo Ball scored so many points last night because it was really bothering me because I
Yeah.
think he's an absolutely atrocious offensive player. So I have two thoughts. So they played the Dallas Mavericks yesterday, and they're potentially the worst defense in the league, certainly a bottom five. But I also I pulled up NBA.com has some really interesting like ways to slice and dice the statistics, and I'm looking at his shooting splits like from different ranges, and interestingly, Lamelo he made from 10 feet out he made every single shot but one, which was a 3 pointer. So he was 3 for 4 from three, and then from 10 feet to 24 feet, so just inside the 3 point line, he was 4 for 4. And then, but inside, basically right near the hoop, he was 1 for 3. So it's really interesting. So he was obviously just incredibly hot. I mean, he missed only one. He took a bunch of jump shots, missed only one of them, still missed a bunch of layups somehow. I think it's I would love to I will definitely be monitoring this because this has piqued my interest a little bit. But I think he based on what I've seen, he looks like a terrible shooter and scorer, at least for year one. And he is a rookie, to be fair to him. He is literally 19 years old. I'm not like dogging him too hard here. He's got so much room to grow. I think he's going to be a great player, but maybe not great, but very good. But yeah, I think he had one of those kind of anomaly games where he just got really really hot, which does happen. And I was trying to find a shot charts, and I just saw you looking at one.
Well,
I don't know.
I was curious because I wanted to see when he got those shots up. Like, was he
Mm.
shooting the ball a lot in the fourth quarter? I mean, it looks like Charlotte lost by 10 points in the fourth quarter here, so that might have been an opportunity. You see him hitting a three-pointer here with 4 minutes left in the game. I'm just kind of looking around a little bit more here.
Yeah, maybe can you do Control F and just like search Lamelo and see like where he pops up?
How do you do that on a Mac, man?
That's a good question. I'm not sure off the top of my head,
Oh, there we
but
go.
there you go.
Oh, you can't
I,
type
I,
because
I
you
would
can
do I would do Lamelo. Too many damn balls.
too many damn balls. Okay, so uh, we're just kind of going to the very bottom here of the fourth quarter. Then, so looks like an offensive rebound, bad pass turnover. He makes a layup with 2:30. He's going to make a three-pointer with 4 minutes, so we're up to 5 points in the fourth quarter. Defensive rebound, 18-foot two shot there. So that's 7 points in the last 7 minutes.
Of a blowout, yeah.
Okay, so 7 points in the fourth quarter. That still leaves 15 through three quarters. So that's actually, you see him here make another 14. He hits a three-pointer. So
And
really,
he made the only layup he made, the only shot in like within 5 feet is how this is breaking out, was in garbage time. So like he missed all of his layups in meaningful minutes, and he made all of his shots. Very very confusing game. I think this potentially could be his high scoring game of the season. Well,
interesting.
we'll see. We'll see. Like I said, I will be monitoring this for us, and I think I'll have maybe a monthly Lamelo update or something.
There we go. That'll be fun. Little mellow updates. That'd be good to hear. But yeah, I don't know. I think we talked enough about the Charlotte Hornets. It's a fun team to kind of keep an eye on. There's a lot of opportunity for their future, but I mean, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think that's a team with a ton of opportunity. The Phoenix
Sure.
Suns.
Absolutely. Let's take a gander.
All right, let's pull up Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, everybody knows Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, SGA, one of the most exciting young players. He had a lot of questions coming into the season. I think so far he's shown us a lot of good things. I think he only had one game where I was like, what's going on here? He's actually playing right now. So he's a floor game for him is going to be, low 30 points. He's going to lead that team in minutes. He's going to put up at least 20 points plus. But he's really getting the rebounds and the assists. This is a guy that's really got the keys to the entire offense. I really like what I'm seeing from him so far. But it's these secondary pieces. I know after we had our big draft, Dalton and I were talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder because we noticed after the draft only 3 Thunder players were taken in our draft, which I mean, technically, if we go through and we filter by every team in the NBA, you're probably going to see almost 5, 6 players rostered on each team here. So there was a lot of opportunity on the Thunder. I had my watch list kind of filled up here. I missed on Basley. I missed on Dort, but I thought I was going to add somebody down here earlier today. It was Hamidou Diallo. He's been playing pretty good too. So with this young Oklahoma City Thunder team, with Al Horford kind of missing some games here, I don't know if you saw what Isaiah Roby did the other night, but this was a young player. He had. Yeah. Have you seen this dunk against Vucevic?
Yes, I did. Yeah,
God, this is a guy that I wanted to watch tonight. I know that we got a Pelicans game on tonight, Thunder Pelicans. I'll probably have to tune into that if I can find it.
That sounds relatively spicy. Some little bottom feeding West action.
So with what's his name? With Al Horford, not playing on the second of a back-to-back here, you get the rookie power forward center here going off for 19.7 boards, 1 steal, 2 blocks, a 36.25 fantasy game in his first career start. So that's pretty exciting. I mean, you're going to give Al Horford his minutes. Mike Muscala is also probably going to be in the mess there, but definitely a guy here. I'm going to add him to my watch list right now because if he starts getting consistent minutes, again, like the Thunder don't have a lot of expectations, and if they're giving young guys a lot of minutes because they want to be better prepared for the next season, I'm going to take advantage of that in fantasy. But Luguentz Dort, this is a guy that I added in another league, not the league that we're looking at here. But this is the guy that's going to be on the floor a lot, a really consistent scorer. He's going to chip in, kind of throughout the rebounds, assists, and steals. So I do like Dort at about 28.5% owned. You see the plus 24.8 in the last week or so. This is a guy that I think should be on people's teams as really the second. I mean, outside of Horford being in and out of the lineup for back-to-backs, I think Luguentz Dort is probably the next best guy to own outside of SGA. And then you got Darius.
Dort. So I got I got all the NBA stats up right now. Mm-hmm. Dort has taken the 34 on a per game basis. He's taken the 34th most threes per game in the NBA, shooting about 6.3 threes per game. And looking at this as I scroll up, he's shooting 47% on 6.3 threes per game. So he's basically making 1 out of every 2 threes he shoots. Very, very, very efficient. As I scroll up and look at the guys who are shooting, at his range or higher, I see one who is Duncan Robinson, who's arguably the greatest 3-point shooter of all time, and Kyrie Irving, who is on an incredible heater right now. And those are the only, and CJ McCollum, who leads the league in 3-point shooting through the first week of the season. So you've got 3 guys shooting at Dort's volume or higher, shooting an equal or better percentage from 3. Now, will Dort keep that up? I'm not certain, but at the same time, besides Duncan Robinson, none of those guys are going to keep it up either. So Dort is hot. He's a good 3-point shooter, and he's getting a lot of minutes. He's going to be scoring, and he also, if you look at those steals numbers, he looks like he's able to contribute in other ways, just outside of just scoring threes, which is good for all sorts of fantasy reasons. I like Dort.
I really like Dort. Again, he's under 29% owned. This is a guy that's probably available sitting there in your league. As your worst player in your team, I think this is a really strong play. I mean, the guy scored 26 points just a couple nights ago. There's probably maybe a game per week where he's going to be the leading scorer based on, that 3-point volume and the efficiency in that category there. He's not going to shoot 47% from 3 the whole season. That might come down to the low 40s, but a guy that's getting the volume. I don't know where our friend is at. Remember the guy that gets the 5-point 3-pointers? This is your guy.
Is that Aiden?
I think that's Aiden Tobin. Yeah, Aiden.
Aiden. When you watch this later, go get Dort.
Dort is the guy that you are looking for. But I think he also played in didn't he play in a 20-man league? Wasn't it just insane? So I don't. Maybe Dort's available. Maybe not. I'm sure if you're in a savvy 20-man league, I'm sure Dort's scooped up. But the other couple guys here, I did want to highlight. This guy's been getting a lot of playing time as well. It's Darius Bazley, and I can't remember where did Bazley go to school.
I have no idea. I watch so for the volume of college or an NBA basketball I watch so little college in comparison. I have no idea where he went to school.
Doesn't even
Utah?
doesn't
No, that's probably the team that picked him.
drafted by Utah. It doesn't even say. Was he was he a guy that
I
came
think
from?
he just came out of the laboratory, Kyle.
Yeah,
They just created him in a lab, and then the Jazz got to pick him and trade him to the
he
Thunder.
must have played overseas somewhere. Um, he's only 20 years old, but doesn't. I mean, we got Finneytown Secondary Campus here for education. Interesting. Um,
Classic Finneytown, the mid-major powerhouse that we all know and love.
Interesting. So, but again, this was a guy like because for me, when we had the Yahoo Sports app for the first week, I was really curious about the Thunder, seeing who they're going to give minutes to. And this guy, he's not going to wow you, but I do like the activity and the rebounds. You see 11, 10, 6. He's kind of trending on the downward right now, but again, he's playing tonight. So if this guy puts up another 20 points at about 21% owned, this guy could easily be worth an ad as the worst player on your 13 or 14 man roster. But then the other guy here, I think he's kind of the backup to Dort here. And this is Hamidou Diallo. And he's been pretty consistent too in the rebounds department. He's been pretty sneaky with the steals too. He's gotten a steal in every game that he's played. But this is a guy that I'm going to add to my watch list right now. If he starts getting more and more minutes, I think it probably would take a Dort or some kind of other injury here. But just someone to file away, put him on the watch list, see what happens. And
Yeah, I think of Diallo, Dort, and Baisley as like they're basically their shooting guard through their power forward, and mostly they could all be on the court at the same time, but like typically there's two to three of them or two of them on the court at once, and they're playing the shooting guard and small forward spot. So basically they're taking up the wing positions for the Thunder. These guys, I think, in theory, should be getting similar minutes unless certain guys emerge as the better options. And so far, Dort definitely seems like the best of the three. But we're only a week in. I think Baisley and Diallo could shine
develop.
more in different weeks, and so I think it's going to be a hot hand approach, so to speak, with those three.
So what do we think about George Hill? Because it looks like they're going to rest George Hill when they can, especially just one game sample, but they rested him on the back-to-back, the second game of a back-to-back there on the 29th. But this is a guy within 2 games, he's gotten 30 points in both games. So if you are okay with potentially missing maybe one game per week, you're going to get maybe 2 or 3 games out of George Hill. At this rate, he's going to get you 75 to 90 points on a given week here. So someone to keep an eye on. He's only 16.5% owned. If you also too, this is probably a guy where if you need to just add someone for one random night and he's hanging around, plug in George Hill. He's one of those guys where you can steal an extra game for the week, especially if you play in a points league. Just plug George Hill in if you know that he's going to be in. Pretty consistent guy there for us. Anything?
Yeah, Hill is he's on track. I mean, the Thunder are trying to trade anyone who's over 8 years old. So George Hill is high on that list because he's probably the second oldest player behind Horford. Um, so essentially what they're doing to try to prop up his trade value is make him look good, put him in good positions, telling him to shoot more, telling him to create more when he's in offensively, letting him run the team a lot more. I mean, how many games did George Hill score over 15 points for the Bucks last year, Kyle? You could probably count it on one hand.
Month, maybe?
And he's on track to have done that in 2 of 3 games this year for the Thunder, and the other game he scored 14. So it's like he's I think he's they want to make him an attractive trade piece, and they're gonna do everything they can to make his stats and his game look sexy until they can ship him to a needy contender or a needy fringe playoff team.
All right, lightning question. Where should the Thunder for the best possible scenario for a guy like George Hill, where could the Thunder send him that's going to make us like really excited for fantasy purposes?
Oklahoma City. I mean, In what other situation is George Hill averaging 30 fantasy points a game? And maybe as the season goes on, if the Thunder decide they're not gonna like make the playoffs, maybe they decide, okay, we play Hill less minutes, or we just take him out of the rotation entirely. But I think Hill's a guy that you'll take the ride for as long as the wheels are on, and the wheels will fall off because he's just too old to sustain this at this point. Um, but I really think the Thunder might be his best scenario, at least from a fantasy perspective.
What about Memphis?
That's an interesting point. I don't. It really just depends on what Memphis thinks of their scenarios and their situations. Do they want to make a panic trade to supplement or to kind of soften the blow of losing Ja for the next 3 to 5 weeks? I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, and Memphis, I think he could score, he could produce in a similar way in Memphis, obviously, until Ja Morant comes back. Once Ja comes back, he would be probably nearly worthless fantasy wise. Besides, maybe Ja will probably get a couple rest games here and there, especially early on after his return. But that's a really good thought. Yeah, he could have some good. Any situation where there's I think about the Celtics a little bit too. If the Celtics got him, for whatever reason they decide they don't love what they're getting out of
Jeff Teague.
Teague. Yeah, thank you. I lost my guy's name there, but yeah. So if they decide, oh, we're not loving Teague, we want a guy, we want a better option for the playoffs. Let's bring in George Hill. Yeah, that could be a good option
Like
too.
that.
So, he's a good like replacement player. And those are the situations where he would have the best chance to produce. But yeah, he's a tricky guy fantasy wise. There is definitely a very small number of scenarios where he feasts, and feasting for him is 25 plus fantasy points per game. So it's not like that's an end of bench guy in best case scenarios.
Right. So I think the way I painted it is he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be available on the waiver wire on and off all season. You're going to add him because he's going to play a game for you maybe once, for the week, and then you just steal a game basically to just get those extra points. But we are going on here. It's almost 8 o'clock. I don't know how much time you have left here. I wanted to talk quickly about the Raptors. That was a team that you kind of highlighted at the beginning of the show as a team that has disappointed through 3 games here. And this is a team here that they kind of have four players that have been really consistent in terms of fantasy production. That's Kyle Lowry, Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet. These guys all hovering, around 33 to 35 fantasy points per game. There's really, you kind of hit on this earlier too with Siakam. We don't know if he's a future, just a feature player for a team. He seems to be more of like a complement. Maybe I would think of him in terms of a Chris Middleton, where he needs, a Batman to his Robin kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Siakam, OG Anunoby, Van Vliet, Lowry. That's going to be, the top 4 rappers that you want here. OG Anunoby is only 55.5% owned, and he's the 14th ranked small forward here. Puts up 47.5 last night, 28.25, 38.5 in the first 2 games. So that's kind of, his floor range here. But all of a sudden, you're seeing him finding his shot the other night. He went 4 of 7 from 3. I know I've been watching him closely because I have him on my teams. But he struggled with his 3 the first 2 games. But all of a sudden, you add these 10 points, from the 10 and the 8. You're looking at a guy here who is massively undervalued, and at 55.5% owned. This is a guy that I think he needs to be owned. You look at the minutes, 36 minutes in all 3 games so far. So this guy he's a massive piece to what the Raptors are trying to do. The other guy here that is kind of worth keeping an eye on is Chris Boucher. He had the monster 58.0 games here, followed up by a 1.25. I don't know why he only played 5 minutes the other night, but only 1 rebound. That was kind of a disaster here. So this is a guy who's about 32.4% owned. I'm keeping my eye on him. I think he's on Dalton's team here, it looks like. But if anyone decides to drop him, this might be a guy that you could potentially add for a night or a game or 2. He is their power forward, their center. He can kind of be the five when Baines goes out here. But just any thoughts, I guess, on the Raptors, or what are we? It's a confusing team right now because they're trying to figure out what this new team is for this season.
Yeah, I mean they have a lot of guys scoring 30 plus fantasy points per game, which is pretty good. I mean, there's not a lot of teams that have four guys doing that. And Boucher, I mean, he's close, but he's close because of an outlier game. So I definitely don't think that's where he's going to be this season. But the Raptors fantasy producers are kind of who we thought they were. I thought Baines would be a little, he's their, he's in the mix where I thought he would be, but his production is really really low. We'll see if he can turn that around a little bit. And he's new to the team and minimal the shortest off season of all time and preseason of all time this year. So he's got some upside as the team grows together and figures it out. And the Raptors are definitely a team that have really good coaching, really good continuity. They have a good system. So specifically for centers, and big guys. So I think he's a guy to keep your eyes on. But outside of those top 2, 4, 6, there's not a lot of meat on the bone, and that's pretty true for most NBA teams. I mean, I really think the Raptors actually probably go deeper than a lot of the other teams in this league. So I think if you have Lowry, you're pretty happy with what he's doing so far. If you have Siakam, you're probably sort of disappointed. I think he's got upside to have a better year as things go forward, but who knows? I mean, if he can't break into the top five at his position, I think he's probably pretty much overdrafted. Onobi, you touched on Onobi. He's been an absolutely kind of a diamond in the rough type player this year. And Van Vliet, he's done what we kind of expected. So overall, more or less a team that's kind of doing what we thought they would be doing fantasy wise, but really underperforming just actual basketball wise.
And they're still figuring themselves out. They lost Marcus Gasol, who else? Serge Ibaka. They lost
Yeah.
several big players that they're still trying to figure out the wrinkles here. They're trying to figure out the minutes with Baines, with Alex Len, Chris Boucher, like we kind of talked about there. And then Norman Powell, man, this was a guy that I was super high on. Thankfully, I got sniped on him, so I didn't have to draft him. But he's been struggling with his shot, not really, producing much in the rebounds, assists, or steals. He's averaging about 20 minutes per game. But it looks like tonight he's having a pretty good game. He must have hit some threes, and he's getting a lot of run here. So maybe Norman Powell is a guy to kind of keep an eye on. He's probably like their best player off the bench at this point. He comes in and he can replace Lowry and move Van Vliet to the true point guard. So he is a pretty versatile player. Keep an eye on Norman Powell. He seems to be a really streaky guy. But we kind of hit the nail on the head with the Raptors there. We got Matt Bain in the chat tonight, though, saying Happy New Year's, sexy beasts. Happy New Year's to you too, Matt Bain. And then he's asking you for some thoughts on the Bucks. So we did talk about this earlier in the show, but I guess we can wrap it up with the Bucks here. John, did you want to kind of recap anything that we're seeing in Milwaukee, or what? Just explain what's going on here.
I think the biggest thing going on is, and we really didn't touch on this at the beginning. So this is the cherry on top of what we started the broadcast with, for lack of a better term. Podcast, I guess, is the actual term, right? The biggest issue I'm seeing with the Bucks is the NBA has pretty much figured out Giannis Antetokounmpo's shtick. They understand what Giannis is trying to do, and they understand because the Raptors and the Heat have created and perfected the blueprint for stopping Giannis. It's the wall. I mean, it's such a simple concept, but it does really work very well. Giannis, there are a lot of teams in the NBA that have a very difficult time executing that defensive strategy because they don't have the appropriate big bodies to throw at Giannis. But there are a lot of teams that do, and especially these Eastern Conference teams that are pretty confident they're going to make a playoff run. They have done things specifically to build a roster, specifically at those center and power forward positions, to give Giannis difficulty to build the appropriate wall where necessary. And so I think just teams continuously go to the well. throw the wall at Giannis, and he just keeps getting charges every game. I'm just like, I cannot believe Giannis got a charge there. I can't believe Giannis got a charge there. I mean, I'm pretty sure the reason the Bucks lost that Celtics game was one of the more interesting basketball games I've watched in a long time. But the Bucks essentially lost that game. Giannis played a perfect game in that game, outside of 4 or 5 charges. He literally had at least 4 charges in that game. I think he actually had 5. But if you take those charges away, it's a 1 point game. You take half of them away, the Bucks win by multiple possessions. It goes from a really nail biter to a semi comfortable win against a very high quality opponent. So I think Giannis has been figured out, and Giannis hasn't adjusted to that. Another thing that I think about with the Bucks is they don't give a crap about the regular season as much anymore. The last 2 years, you could tell they were a team that was fighting for respect, fighting for to prove they belong in the upper echelon in the NBA. And in 2020, end of 2020, and now in 2021, that doesn't matter to them as much. And I think I wouldn't say they're coasting in the regular season, but I don't think it means as much to them. And I think especially as the season goes onward and we start to get into February and March and April, and then as those playoffs start creeping up, I think you'll see them flip a switch, and then hopefully when the playoffs do come around, they can flip that final switch and activate full playoff mode. But one thing that concerns me even still with regards to all of that is the way they play their defensive scheme, and they constantly get obliterated from the 3 point line. Kyle, you talked about how the Bucks seem to do better when they run a faster pace, and I definitely agree with that. And a big reason why I agree is because the Bucks just give up three after three after three, and when you're giving up so many threes, semi uncontested most of the time, you have to keep pace. You have to score fast to keep up with other teams. So those are probably 3 of the biggest reasons that are kind of top of mind for me, Matt. Why I think the Bucks are struggling, for by their standards to start this season off. Kyle, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Just a interesting observation here. I haven't looked really at Giannis's. I've seen the game logs, but this is the first time that this clicked in my head. But look at the game logs here. Notice the 3 games where he had the best fantasy outputs. The 50, the 55, the 63. These are all losses for the Bucks. The games where he didn't have to play a lot of minutes, get a lot of stats and rebounds, assists, and all that stuff. He didn't have to do much. That game was pretty much decided earlier in the contest, and they kind of could just coast. So that almost to me means if we're relying on Giannis to do way too much, that's going to be trouble. And that means nobody else is really chipping in. The games where other people are chipping in, and if Giannis gets some help from Middleton or Holiday or even DiVincenzo from the threes earlier in the game, all of a sudden there's less pressure on Giannis to be taking over at the end of the games. I just think we got to wait and see what the Bucks are going to continue to do with this lineup, and just this is still at the core. Like there's steady pieces that have been there for a while, but they're still figuring out these new faces with Portis, with Drew Holiday. They're getting Bryn Forbes involved a little bit, so there's a little bit new wrinkle from the last 2 years. And then here's the other thought too. It's week 2 of the fantasy season, but we're 5 games into the season. The Bucks' upcoming schedule for the next 2 weeks is they get Chicago, Detroit, Utah, Cleveland, Orlando, and Detroit. I think just give it some time. The good's gonna outweigh the bad in a couple weeks here, and this team's gonna. It's preseason basketball at the moment right now, so I just think 3 really fun games against Detroit in the next 2 weekends or the next 2 weeks. I think there's going to be a little bit more positivity from the Bucks coming forward.
And Dallas is 1-3 right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you could Utah and Cleveland are solid. So you could in worst case scenario could possibly be I don't know how many games it is, but 6-2 over that stretch or whatever if it's 8 games.
Yep, that's an 8-game stretch. So if you go 6-2, that puts the Bucks all of a sudden at 8-5-ish. That's on the low end. But I mean, that's potentially a team that could get hot, to start the January here. It really depends if Porzingis is back in the lineup by the 15th for that Dallas game. But we got that big game against Brooklyn here on January 18th, TNT 6:30, I believe. Yeah, that's a Monday night game. So um, and then they play the Lakers the next night here. So I'm willing to be patient with the Bucks, and I want to see what happens in those two games. I think by then we should have a better idea of how this rotation and how things are going on. But I really can't judge that team up until we get, I think, to those games. So a lot of fun stuff there coming up with the Bucks. John, as we're going over an hour here, was there any final thoughts here for you before we sign out?
Nothing super serious important that we absolutely have to talk about. A lot. There's so much going on, but it's been a fun season, and we'll keep talking about things as we go on. So I'm excited to just keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and then I did want to shout out Matt Bame has one more question, but I did want to just at least say if anyone's still watching that we do plan. I think Tuesday nights are going to be the night where we get John coming on as well as Drake. So that's going to be a three-man little powwow. We're just going to kind of just go off the cuff and just keep talking about whatever is the current hot moment of the time there. But I'm also trying to get another night of basketball content in the weekly schedule. So Thursdays might be that. I might even do a Friday show. I think that's going to be kind of loose and fluid. If I'll send invites to John and Drake and see if they want to hang out, but otherwise I will man those on my own. But Matt Bame asking the tough questions. He says he's pondering Harden to the Bucks. I actually think it would be better now that I really analyzed it. Ha ha. Your thoughts? Anything on James Harden in Milwaukee?
The only negative of James Harden in Milwaukee is how do you get him there? I think you probably have to trade Middleton, and you probably have to trade Drew Holiday.
Mm,
So you're looking at a situation where you're pairing Giannis and Harden, or you were talking about that big three that we spoke of earlier in the pod, Kyle, and I like. And there's a lot of upside to both scenarios. I just think the defensive flexibility of the three-headed monster of Giannis, Middleton, and Drew Holiday, along with their offensive upside, I think that has some, in my mind at least, I think that has the potential to be very challenging for teams to stop in the playoffs. But Giannis and Harden, I mean,
I
I don't
can't
know.
figure
I
out.
couldn't think of a better. I couldn't think of two superstars that complement each other better. I mean, everything that Harden sucks at, Giannis is great at. Everything that Harden is sucks at, and then vice versa. And they would make beautiful music together if they could somehow figure out a way to do that. But I think about what it would cost, and that makes me
I
nervous. That's my only trepidation, Matt. The only reason I say probably not, and I don't like it, is because they would have to give up pretty much everything that's not Giannis.
and I can't figure out the end to the means there. You're talking about at least Middleton, probably DiVincenzo is a piece that teams would be excited about as a young chip. Um, I just yeah, it would be a blockbuster deal, but the Bucks would kind of be taking at that point almost two steps back just to take two steps forward with Giannis or with Harden. I don't really know if that's going to make the Bucks a better team as a whole, but it's definitely something fun to think about and just stew on. But if you don't have any other thoughts on the evening, John, we'll let you guys get out of here. I want to say Happy New Year to John, to Matt Bame. We had Justin in the chat here. I just want to thank everybody in the chat room for hanging out. Happy New Year. We are finally on the cusp of the other side of 2020, and that's a damn good thing. That's a damn good thing. So um,
Amen.
for John, you can follow him on Twitter. I have him in the link in the description below. JK Heffernon, you can find him there. You know where to find me, somewhere on this little screen right here. But again, thank you guys so much. John, have a good New Year's Eve. We'll be in touch, man. Have a good rest of your night, guys. Thank you so much. Peace.
Happy New Year, Kyle.